I was standing in my own kitchen, watching my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, model what she thought was a piece of costume jewelry at my dining room table. The pink diamond ring caught the afternoon light, streaming through the windows I'd cleaned that morning. Windows in the house my late husband built for me 43 years ago. "Oh, Grace, you won't mind if I borrow this old thing, will you?" Cynthia held up her hand, admiring how the ring looked against her manicured nails. "It's so vintage, perfect for the charity auction photos tomorrow. People love that authentic old money look." She didn't wait for my answer. She never did. "I mean, it's not like it's worth anything real," she continued, turning her hand this way and that. "But it'll photograph beautifully with my Chanel dress. The whole grandmother's attic treasure aesthetic is so in right now." I smiled and said nothing, yet my son Liam looked up from his laptop at the kitchen island. The island where I'd made him countless lunches before school, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd celebrated his acceptance to law school. "Mom's always had interesting pieces," he said without really looking at either of us. "Most of it's just sentimental value, though." Cynthia laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Exactly. Sentimental, sweet, but not exactly Cartier." If she had bothered to look closely, really look, she would have seen the tiny inscription inside the band. "Inventory item #847 Estva, value $3.2 million. GR appraisals 2019. But Cynthia had never been one for details. She saw what she wanted to see, took what she wanted to take, and assumed the rest of the world would simply adjust. That was her first mistake. Little did she know I'd been taking inventory for 2 years. Every borrowed credit card, every temporarily moved piece of furniture, every time she'd rearranged my living room without asking, every time she'd answered my phone and told callers I was resting. I had documentation for all of it, filed away in a place she'd never think to look. Because in Cynthia's mind, I was just Grace, the 71-year-old woman who was slowly becoming invisible in her own home, the inconvenient mother-in-law who asked too many questions and remembered too much about the way things used to be. But inventory has always been my specialty. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, I have to ask, where are you listening to this right now? Are you folding laundry in a house that doesn't feel quite like yours anymore? Sitting in your car after another family dinner where you felt invisible? If you've ever felt like the unpaid help in your own home, you'll understand every word of what happened next. The thing is, it didn't start with the ring. It started 2 years ago, 3 months after Liam and Cynthia's wedding, when they moved into my house temporarily while they looked for their own place. That temporary arrangement had a way of becoming permanent, the way weeds have a way of becoming gardens if you don't pay attention. The first time I truly felt invisible was at the annual St. Catherine's Charity Gala in my own dining room. I'd been hosting this event for 15 years, ever since Robert passed, and I needed something to fill the enormous space his absence had left. 24 carefully chosen guests, 3 courses prepared by Henderson's Catering, and a silent auction that typically raised $60,000 for the Children's Hospital. But that October evening, as I moved between the kitchen and dining room, ensuring everything ran smoothly, I noticed something unsettling. When guests asked about the beautiful florals or complimented the wine selection, Cynthia would beam and say, "Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're enjoying our little gathering." Our gathering, in my dining room at my table, with my grandmother's china. I caught Mrs. Patterson from the bank asking Cynthia about the antique sideboard, the one Robert and I had found at an estate sale in Charleston 30 years ago. "It's been in the family forever," Cynthia said, running her hand along the mahogany surface. "We have such wonderful pieces throughout the house. When I approached to join the conversation, Mrs. Patterson smiled politely, but her attention remained fixed on Cynthia. "You have such an eye for decorating, dear. This whole room is just stunning." "Thank you," Cynthia said. Grace helped a little with the setup. Helped with the setup? In my own home, I'd become the hired help. I excused myself to check on dessert and found myself standing alone in my kitchen, listening to the sounds of laughter from the room where I'd celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, where I'd built a life. But somehow, in the space of one evening, I'd been edited out of my own story. The pattern only got worse from there. By November, Cynthia had developed a habit of borrowing my credit cards for household expenses. She'd appear in my bedroom doorway with her brightest smile, holding her phone. "Grace, I'm ordering groceries for dinner tonight. Can I use your Amex? I'll transfer the money later." Later never came, but the charges did. Whole Foods deliveries for $73, when Cynthia had specifically told the guests she was preparing a simple family meal. Sephora purchases for $148. A subscription to some meal kit service for $165 a month that I certainly hadn't requested. Each swipe, each purchase, I wrote it all down. Credit card statements went into a manila folder labeled Household Records, 2,023 inches that I kept in my bedroom closet. Behind the photo albums Cynthia had never shown any interest in exploring. But the financial exploitation was nothing compared to what happened at the Hendersons' Christmas party. I'd known Margaret and Bill Henderson for 28 years. Margaret had been my closest friend since Robert's funeral, the person who'd helped me navigate those first impossible months of widowhood, who'd convinced me that I could still host dinner parties and attend social events even though I was no longer part of a couple. At their annual Christmas gathering, Margaret pulled me aside in her kitchen, her face creased with concern. "Grace, honey, I have to ask, are you feeling all right? Cynthia mentioned that you've been having some difficulties lately." My stomach dropped. "What kind of difficulties?" "She said you've been forgetting things, getting confused about dates, mixing up names. She seemed genuinely worried about you." Margaret touched my arm gently. "I know this can be such a hard conversation, but have you considered talking to Dr. Williams about it?" The room spun slightly. Cynthia had been in Margaret's ear, planting seeds about my mental capacity. But when had I forgotten anything? When had I mixed up a single name or date? That night, as we drove home in Liam's car, because apparently I was no longer trusted to drive in the evening, I confronted them both. "What exactly did you tell Margaret about my health?" I asked from the back seat, the place where I'd somehow been relegated in my own family. Cynthia turned around with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Grace, I was just expressing concern. You seemed a little scattered at their last dinner party. I was worried about you." "Scattered how?" "Well, you told that story about Robert and the fishing trip twice in the same conversation. And you asked Bill about his knee surgery 3 times. She reached over and patted my hand. "It's completely normal at your age. Nothing to be embarrassed about." I had told the fishing story once. I had asked about Bill's surgery once, when I first arrived, and then followed up once more when he mentioned physical therapy. But somehow, in Cynthia's retelling, I'd become the confused elderly woman who couldn't keep track of her own words. Liam glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Mom, if you're having trouble with memory stuff, we should probably—" "I'm not having trouble with anything," I said quietly. But Liam laughed, actually laughed, and said, "That's what everyone says, Mom." My son's laughter hurt more than her words, because in that moment I realized that my own child had already decided I wasn't reliable anymore. The woman who'd raised him, who'd managed a household budget for 45 years, who'd run her own estate appraisal business for 2 decades. Somehow I'd become the unreliable old woman who needed to be managed. That was the night I started keeping more detailed records. But what they didn't know, what Cynthia in particular had forgotten in her eagerness to establish herself as the new head of household, was that I'd spent 40 years as a certified estate appraiser. I'd valued million-dollar collections for estate sales, insurance claims, and divorce settlements. I could spot a genuine Tiffany lamp from across a room and estimate its auction value within $200. They forgot I'd valued million-dollar collections for 40 years. Every piece in my house, every painting, every piece of furniture, I knew exactly what it was worth, when we'd acquired it, and what documentation existed to prove ownership. While Cynthia was busy playing hostess in my dining room, and Liam was busy enabling his wife's gradual takeover of my life, I was quietly doing what I'd always done, taking inventory. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who sees everything. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in February, while I was upstairs organizing Robert's old office. I'd been putting off this task for months, but something about the winter light streaming through those familiar windows made me finally ready to sort through his papers, his books, the remnants of a life we'd built together. I was just closing the last filing cabinet when I heard Cynthia's voice drifting up from the kitchen, sharp and purposeful in the way it got when she was making plans. "Well, I've been researching facilities, and honestly, some of them are quite nice these days," she was saying into her phone, not like those depressing places from the 80s. I froze at the top of the stairs. My hand still on the banister, Robert had carved himself during our first year in this house. I know it seems sudden, but Margaret, you should see how she's been declining. Just last week, she couldn't remember where she'd put her reading glasses. And yesterday she asked me twice about the grocery list. Cynthia's laugh was light, casual, as if she were discussing weekend plans. Liam and I are trying to be patient, but we can't ignore reality forever. My heart hammered against my ribs. Margaret. She was talking to my Margaret, my closest friend. "Oh, the legal side is actually straightforward," Cynthia continued. "Liam looked into it. If we can demonstrate diminished capacity, we can get power of attorney transferred. It's really for her own protection, you know? This house is far too big for her to manage alone, and frankly, the financial responsibility is becoming overwhelming for her." I pressed myself against the wall, afraid to breathe too loudly. Exactly. And honestly, once we have the legal authority, we can start making some practical decisions about the property. This neighborhood has appreciated so much in the past 5 years. Now might actually be the perfect time to sell. Grace would be so much happier in a community setting with people her own age, activities planned for her. She wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big old house anymore. They were already picking out my room, planning my life, my future, the disposition of everything Robert and I had worked for, and I was standing in my own hallway, eavesdropping on the dissolution of my independence. The Sunshine Manor place in Westfield looks perfect. Private rooms, nice common areas, and it's only 40 minutes away, so we can visit regularly. Well, I can visit. Liam's schedule is so demanding, but I'm sure I can manage a monthly trip. Monthly. She was planning to warehouse me 40 minutes away and visit once a month. I made it back to Robert's office on shaking legs and closed the door as quietly as possible. Then I sat in his old leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and tried to process what I'd just heard. They weren't just taking my house. They were taking my life, my dignity, my right to make my own decisions. And they were doing it with the casual efficiency of people planning a vacation. That night, I waited until, They'd gone to bed before I went downstairs to make myself tea. But as I passed through the dining room, something glinted in the moonlight from the sideboard where I kept my jewelry box. The box was open. Several pieces were missing from their usual spots. My mother's pearl earrings, gone. The sapphire brooch Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, gone. And the pink diamond ring, the one I'd inherited from my great-aunt Catherine, the one that had been appraised as part of my insurance update just 4 years ago, gone. But the next morning there was Cynthia at the breakfast table, wearing the pearl earrings like they were costume jewelry from Target. The sapphire brooch was pinned to her blazer, the one she wore to her job at the marketing firm. The job she'd only taken after moving into my house because she finally felt secure enough to pursue her career dreams. And on her right hand, catching the morning light like a small sun, was my great-aunt Catherine's ring. "Good morning, Grace," she said brightly, not bothering to hide any of it. "I hope you don't mind. I borrowed a few pieces for work today. My boss is taking some clients to lunch at the country club, and I want to make the right impression." Borrowed, like you borrow a cup of sugar or a magazine. "That ring belonged to my great-aunt," I said carefully. "Oh yes, isn't it sweet? So vintage. I love pieces with history." She held up her hand, admiring how the diamond caught the light. "You have such interesting family jewelry, Grace. Most of it's not really my style, a little old-fashioned, you know, but this piece has such character." She wore my mother's ring like it was from a gumball machine. Liam walked into the kitchen then, dressed for court in the navy suit I'd bought him for his law school graduation. He kissed Cynthia's cheek and grabbed his travel mug from the counter where I'd packed to get his lunch every day for 18 years. "Love the earrings," he told his wife. "Aren't they perfect? Your mom has such a collection. I'm thinking of organizing everything in her jewelry box. It's gotten a bit chaotic up there. Maybe we could get some proper storage solutions, make everything easier for her to find. Organize my jewelry box, make it easier for me to find my own possessions in my own bedroom." "That's really thoughtful of you," Liam said, and I heard genuine affection in his voice. Affection for the woman who was systematically stealing from his mother while planning to have me declared incompetent. They left together that morning, my son and daughter-in-law, wearing my mother's earrings and my great-aunt's ring, discussing their day while I stood at the kitchen window watching their cars disappear down the driveway. That night, after they'd returned home and settled into their evening routine, watching Netflix in the living room that had somehow become their space, while I retreated to the small den off the kitchen, I made my choice. I picked up the phone and called Frank Morrison, the lawyer who'd been Robert's best friend and my legal advisor for the past 15 years. "Grace?" Frank's voice was warm, concerned. "It's late. Is everything all right?" "Frank," I said, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together 40 years ago. "I think I'm going to need your help with something." The next morning, while Liam and Cynthia were at work, Cynthia wearing yet another piece from my jewelry box, this time my grandmother's gold bracelet, I drove to Frank's office with 3 manila folders full of documentation, credit card statements, photographs of missing jewelry, a detailed list of every item that had been borrowed or reorganized over the past 6 months, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, and a small digital recorder I'd purchased the previous afternoon. "Frank," I said, spreading the papers across his mahogany desk, "I need you to tell me about elder abuse laws, and I need to know what constitutes grand theft in this state." That night, I made my choice, because sometimes the only way to save your life is to be willing to risk everything you thought you couldn't live without. Frank Morrison had been practicing estate law for 37 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen him speechless. But as he flipped through my documentation, 3 manila folders of carefully organized evidence. His usually composed face grew darker with each page. "Grace," he said finally, setting down the bank statements that showed Cynthia's unauthorized use of my credit cards. "How long has this been going on?" "The financial part, about 18 months. The jewelry theft is more recent, maybe 4 months." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of my jewelry box, before and after shots. I started documenting when pieces went missing. Frank's jaw dropped when he saw my files. Everything was categorized, dated, cross-referenced. Each credit card statement was highlighted in different colors: yellow for legitimate household expenses, pink for personal purchases Cynthia had made without permission, blue for items that had never been reimbursed as promised. "This is incredibly thorough," he said, examining a spreadsheet I'd created, tracking every piece of jewelry that had disappeared. "You've been planning this for a while." "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "There's a difference." Frank picked up the insurance appraisal from 2019, the one that valued my jewelry collection at just over $400,000. His eyebrows rose when he reached the entry for item hash 847. Pink diamond ring, estate cut, 3.2 carats, valued at $3,200,000. "Grace, this ring is the one she's been wearing to work for the past 3 weeks. She told her boss it's vintage costume jewelry." Frank leaned back in his leather chair, the same chair where he'd helped Robert and me write our wills, plan our estate, navigate the legal complexities of a life built together. The pink diamond alone makes this federal territory. That was the moment everything became real. Federal. Grand theft of property valued over $5,000 can be prosecuted federally, especially when it involves vulnerable adults. But Grace, with this ring, he shook his head slowly. We're talking about a potential sentence of 10 to 15 years. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not satisfaction exactly, but clarity. What are my options? Frank explained the legal landscape with the same methodical precision he'd used to walk Robert and me through our estate planning 15 years earlier. Elder financial abuse was a federal crime. Grand theft was a federal crime. Conspiracy to defraud me of my property and independence could be prosecuted under RICO statutes if we could prove coordination between Liam and Cynthia. "The recording device you mentioned, have you used it yet?" "Yesterday morning. I have Cynthia on tape telling her sister that I'm basically senile and that she and Liam are just waiting for the right moment to move forward with guardianship proceedings." I pulled the small recorder from my purse. She also discusses selling specific pieces from my collection to simplify my life before the move to assisted living. "Jesus, Grace," Frank rubbed his temples. "This isn't just theft. This is a coordinated effort to systematically strip you of your independence and assets." That afternoon, Frank explained my rights and legal options with the care of someone who'd watched too many elderly clients lose everything to family members who saw inheritance as an early retirement plan. I could file criminal charges immediately. I could pursue civil recovery of my property. I could obtain a restraining order requiring them to leave my house. But there was a better way. "If we're strategic about this," Frank said, "we can build a case that's absolutely bulletproof. But it means being patient a little longer. It means letting them think they're winning while we gather evidence that will make conviction inevitable." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would temporarily relocate, not because I was incompetent, but because I was creating distance between myself and potential retaliation while the investigation proceeded. Frank had a colleague whose wife ran a private residence for women in transition. Not a nursing home, but a beautiful Victorian house in the next county where I could stay as a paying guest. Margaret Whitmore has been taking in women who need temporary housing for 20 years, Frank explained. Widows transitioning between homes, women leaving difficult marriages, people recovering from medical procedures who need support. It's completely private, beautifully maintained, and Margaret is a retired social worker who understands exactly what you're going through. From there, I would be able to monitor my own house through security cameras I'd never mentioned to Liam or Cynthia. Cameras Robert had installed 5 years ago after a break-in down the street. Cameras that fed to an app on my phone that neither of them knew existed. The beauty of this approach, Frank continued, is that once you're out of the house, their behavior will likely escalate. They'll feel free to take more, to be more careless, to discuss their plans more openly, and will have everything documented. Frank would file the initial police report immediately, but request that they delay arrest until we had gathered sufficient evidence to ensure conviction. In the meantime, federal investigators would begin building their case, a process that could take anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on how much additional evidence Cynthia and Liam provided through their own behavior. The goal isn't just to recover your property, Frank said. It's to ensure that they face real consequences for what they've done, and to establish legal precedent that protects you from any future attempts at guardianship or conservatorship. I would watch my house burn from across town. Not literally, of course, but I would watch everything Robert and I had built together be dismantled by people who saw our life's work as nothing more than assets to be liquidated, and I would document every moment of it. That evening, I called Margaret Whitmore's residence and made arrangements to move in the following week. The story would be simple. My doctor had recommended a brief stay at a wellness retreat to help me manage stress and sort through some health concerns. Nothing alarming, just a 71-year-old woman taking better care of herself. Cynthia was thrilled when I announced my plans. "Oh, Grace, that sounds wonderful," she said, her eyes already calculating how quickly she could redecorate the master bedroom. "How long will you be gone?" "The initial stay is 8 weeks," I told her, "but it could extend depending on how I respond to the program." 8 weeks was plenty of time, more than enough for them to hang themselves with my rope. That night, I sat in Robert's office and wrote 3 letters. One to my sister in Oregon, explaining what was happening and asking her to serve as emergency contact for Frank. One to Margaret Henderson, apologizing for what she was about to witness and asking for her friendship during what would certainly be a difficult period. And one to Liam, a letter I would give him only after everything was over, explaining how much I'd loved him and how deeply he'd disappointed me, but also leaving the door open for reconciliation if he was willing to do the hard work of earning back my trust. Because even in the midst of planning my family's legal destruction, I was still a mother. The wheels of justice started turning, but first I had to step out of their way. Margaret Whitmore's house was exactly what Frank had promised, a graceful Victorian with wraparound porches and gardens that reminded me of the home Robert and I had dreamed of retiring to someday. When I arrived on that crisp March morning with 2 suitcases and a box of books, Margaret met me at the front door with the kind of warm smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "Grace, welcome," she said, taking one of my bags without being asked. "Your room overlooks the garden. I thought you'd enjoy the morning light." I had told Liam and Cynthia that I was going to a wellness retreat, recommended by Dr. Williams for stress management and some minor health concerns. Nothing serious, just preventive care for a woman my age. Cynthia had been so helpful in packing my things, carefully selecting which clothes I would need, which books would be appropriate, even choosing a few pieces of jewelry, in case there are any social activities. She'd been especially thoughtful about the jewelry, picking out several pieces I rarely wore while leaving behind the more valuable items. Items she could safeguard while I was away. The retreat story was perfect cover. It explained my temporary absence without creating alarm, and it established me as someone proactively managing her health rather than someone fleeing abuse. Most importantly, it gave me a legitimate reason to be unavailable by phone for hours at a time. After all, wellness retreats encourage digital detox and meditation. What Cynthia didn't know was that within hours of my departure, she had thrown a celebration. I watched it happen from my comfortable bedroom at Margaret's through the security camera app on my tablet that showed multiple angles of my house in real time. The cameras Robert had installed were small, discreet, positioned to monitor entry points and common areas for security purposes. I'd never mentioned them to Liam or Cynthia because they'd been installed before their marriage, and it simply hadn't occurred to me that I would ever need to watch my own family stealing from me. She threw a party the night I left. By 8 o'clock that evening, there were 6 cars in my driveway, and the sound of laughter drifting from my living room. Laughter I could hear through the camera's audio feed as I sat in Margaret's peaceful parlor, watching my life be celebrated as someone else's victory. Cynthia had invited her book club, her sister, and 2 couples from Liam's law firm. She was giving them a tour of her house, pointing out features and furnishings with the proprietary pride of someone showing off a new acquisition. "This dining room table seats 12, I heard her tell one of the guests. "It's been in the family for generations. We're thinking of hosting Thanksgiving here this year. Really establish this as the gathering place for the whole extended family." The table had been Robert's grandmother's. We'd inherited it when his mother passed in 1987, and we'd hosted 17 Thanksgivings around it before Liam brought home his first serious girlfriend. Now it was being presented as Cynthia's family heirloom. But the most devastating moment came when I watched her lead the group upstairs to what had been Robert's office. She'd already moved most of his books to the basement and rearranged the furniture to create what she called her meditation space. "I'm turning this into my wellness studio," she explained to her guests. "The natural light is perfect for yoga, and it's so quiet up here. Grace used this as storage mostly. You know how elderly people collect things? But it has such beautiful potential." Storage. Robert's carefully organized office, where he'd managed our finances for 40 years, where he'd written letters to our grandchildren we'd never had, where he'd kept the books that had shaped his thinking and the papers that documented our life together, reduced to storage. Clutter to be cleared away. That's when I called Frank. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," I told him, watching Cynthia show her book club through my master bedroom, opening drawers and discussing her plans for updating the decor to reflect a younger energy. "How much faster?" "She's already treating the house like it's hers, completely. And Frank, she's going through everything. My personal papers, my financial records. She's not even trying to hide it anymore." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Grace, we need to accelerate our timeline. If she's accessing your financial information, she could do significant damage before we're ready to move." That night, Frank filed the police report with all of my documentation. Detective Sarah Chen from the county sheriff's office called me the next morning to set up an interview, and by afternoon, federal investigators were involved due to the value of the stolen jewelry. "The pink diamond makes this a federal case automatically," Detective Chen explained during our phone call. "But honestly, Mrs. Morrison, your documentation is so thorough that we could probably prosecute this case tomorrow if we had to." "What's stopping you?" "Strategy. If we arrest them now, we recover what we can prove they stole, but we might miss bigger crimes they're planning. Your lawyer thinks they're building towards something more significant." possibly attempting to gain legal guardianship so they can liquidate your entire estate. And if they succeed, they won't. But if we let them try, we can charge them with conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse in addition to theft. We're talking about decades in prison instead of just a few years. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day, I watched my house become less recognizable. Cynthia had contractors in by the second week, updating fixtures and painting over wallpaper Robert and I had chosen together. She'd moved her home office into our master bedroom and converted the guest room into what she called a vision boarding space for manifestation work. When Liam came home each evening, he seemed genuinely pleased with the changes. I watched him on camera, walking through rooms that had been transformed in my absence, nodding approvingly at his wife's improvements. "The house feels so much lighter," I heard him tell Cynthia one evening, as they sat in what used to be my reading nook, drinking wine from glasses that had been wedding gifts 43 years ago. "More contemporary. I think this is exactly what Mom needed. Some distance to gain perspective on how overwhelming this place had become for her." She was already playing the grieving daughter-in-law, telling neighbors that I was struggling with the transition to senior living, and that she and Liam were trying to honor my wishes while also being realistic about my needs. Mrs. Patterson from down the street stopped by to check on the house, and I watched Cynthia invite her in for coffee, explaining that they were just keeping things maintained until I decided whether to return or move somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. "It's such a big responsibility," Cynthia told Mrs. Patterson, gesturing around the kitchen where I'd baked birthday cakes for every child in the neighborhood for 20 years. Grace built a beautiful life here, but at 71, managing a property this size was becoming overwhelming for her. We're just trying to help her transition gracefully. To assisted living, to irrelevance, to having my life's work packaged and sold off piece by piece. But what they didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded. Every contractor visit was documented. Every piece of furniture that was moved, every personal item that was reorganized, every financial document that was accessed without permission, all of it was evidence. The wheels of justice had started turning, and I was no longer standing in their way. 6 weeks into my stay at Margaret Whitmore's house, I received the phone call I'd been waiting for. "Grace, it's Detective Chen. We're moving tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I need you to understand. Once this starts, there's no going back. Are you prepared for that?" I was sitting in Margaret's sunroom, watching her roses bloom in the morning light, feeling more clear-headed than I had in 2 years. I've been prepared since the day they started planning my nursing home placement. The federal agents will execute the search warrant first. We'll need you to return to the house around 10 a.m. to identify your property and provide testimony. It's going to be intense, Grace. There will likely be media coverage, and your neighbors will see everything. "Good," I said, and I meant it. I want them to see everything. The next morning, I dressed carefully in the navy blue suit I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the one that made me feel like the competent, professional woman I'd been for 71 years. Margaret drove me to the end of my street at 9:45 a.m., and we sat in her car, waiting for my phone to ring. From where we parked, I could see the commotion. 3 black SUVs in my driveway, yellow tape across my front lawn, neighbors standing on their porches, phones out, recording everything. The Hendersons had come outside with coffee mugs, looking like they were watching a movie being filmed. My phone buzzed. "Detective Chen. We're ready for you." The walk up my own driveway felt like walking through a dream. Agent Martinez from the FBI met me at my front door. The door Robert had painted blue every 3 years for 4 decades. The door where I'd welcomed neighbors with casseroles and children selling Girl Scout cookies and mail carriers during the holidays. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming. We've recovered significant evidence, but we need you to identify specific items. The look on Cynthia's face when they read the warrant was priceless. She was standing in my living room in her silk pajamas and robe, her hair still mussed from sleep, staring at the federal agents like they'd materialized from another dimension. There must be some mistake, she kept saying to Agent Martinez. Grace is at a wellness retreat. She's been having memory issues. This is probably some kind of confusion. Ma'am, please step aside while we execute this warrant. That's when she saw me walking through my front door, flanked by Detective Chen and Agent Martinez, very much not confused and very much not at a wellness retreat. Grace, Cynthia's voice was small, confused. What's happening? Why are there federal agents in our house? Your house? I asked quietly. Liam appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his boxer shorts and t-shirt, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 6 weeks. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions, confusion, relief, and then growing horror as he processed the scene below. Mom, what's going on? Your wife stole a $3 million ring, I said simply, among other things. Agent Martinez had laid everything out on my dining room table like evidence in a courtroom. My jewelry, each piece in its own clear bag with an evidence tag. Credit card statements with highlighted charges. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers. The insurance appraisals that valued each stolen item. And there, in the center of it all, was my great-aunt Catherine's pink diamond ring, photographed from every angle, its value clearly documented. $3,200,000. Cynthia stared at the ring like she was seeing it for the first time. That's impossible. That's costume jewelry. I bought it at an estate sale. Ma'am, you're wearing a $3.2 million diamond that was stolen from Mrs. Morrison's jewelry box, Agent Martinez said. We have photographs of you wearing it in public, social media posts where you've displayed it, and witness testimony from several individuals who can identify it as Mrs. Morrison's property. That's when Liam finally found his voice. Mom, surely there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, looking at my son, really looking at him for the first time in months, is that you thought I was too old and too stupid to protect myself. My son looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. The quiet, diminishing woman he'd been so casually erasing from her own life had been replaced by someone he didn't recognize, someone who'd been documenting his complicity in his wife's crimes for 6 months. Detective Chen pulled out a transcript of the recordings I'd made. Mr. Morrison, we have you on tape discussing your mother's declining mental capacity and agreeing that moving her to assisted living would solve everyone's problems. We also have recordings of you and your wife discussing the sale of specific items from this house to simplify your mother's life. Those were private conversations about legitimate concerns. Mr. Morrison, your wife has been systematically stealing from your mother for 18 months. Grand theft of property, valued over $5,000, is a federal crime. Conspiracy to defraud a vulnerable adult is a federal crime. Elder financial abuse is a federal crime. Detective Chen's voice was calm, factual. You weren't having conversations about care. You were planning a crime. By now, the whole neighborhood was watching. Mrs. Patterson was standing at the edge of my lawn with 3 other neighbors, phones out, recording everything. The mail carrier had stopped his truck and was openly staring. Even the teenagers from down the street had come out to watch the show. I found myself strangely calm as Agent Martinez walked me through the evidence. Every piece of jewelry Cynthia had taken, every unauthorized credit card charge, every conversation they'd recorded where she discussed my supposed incompetence and their plans for my future. Mrs. Morrison, we need you to confirm that these items belong to you, and that you did not give permission for their removal from your home. I confirm that every item on this table belongs to me. I confirm that I never gave permission for any of these items to be taken from my house. And I confirm that my daughter-in-law has been wearing my great-aunt's engagement ring to work for 6 weeks while telling people it was costume jewelry she picked up at a garage sale. Cynthia was crying now, but they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. This is insane, Grace. We were trying to help you. You can't manage this house anymore. Everyone can see that. You're being manipulated by that lawyer, and now you're destroying your own family over some old jewelry. Some old jewelry? Agent Martinez held up the evidence bag containing the pink diamond. Ma'am, this ring is worth more than most people's houses. Grace, please, Liam said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. Please don't do this. We can work this out privately, as a family. We stopped being a family the day you decided I was incompetent to live in my own house, I said. The whole neighborhood watched her perp walk, Cynthia still in her silk pajamas, being led to a federal vehicle in handcuffs while neighbors filmed everything on their phones. The woman who'd spent 6 weeks playing Lady of the Manor, hosting dinner parties in my dining room, and giving tours of her house, reduced to a criminal defendant in full view of the community she'd been so eager to impress. Mrs. Patterson caught my eye as the car drove away. She looked stricken, guilty. Grace, I had no idea. When she said you were having memory problems, she lied, I said simply, about everything. By evening, the story was on 3 local news channels and spreading across social media. Daughter-in-law arrested for stealing $3 million diamond from elderly mother-in-law. The footage of Cynthia's arrest was being shared with captions like, "When keeping up with the Joneses goes wrong," and "Plot twist, Grandma's jewelry wasn't junk after all." The woman who'd been so concerned about maintaining appearances, who'd worried about making the right impression at charity events and country club lunches, was now the star of her own public humiliation. Justice, it turned out, had excellent timing. The federal courthouse in downtown Springfield was nothing like the municipal building where I'd paid property taxes for 40 years or renewed my driver's license. This was serious business: marble floors, metal detectors, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that made you whisper even when you weren't in the courtroom itself. I was there for Cynthia's arraignment, 6 days after her arrest. Frank had explained that I didn't have to attend, but I wanted to see it through. I needed to look her in the eye one more time and know that justice wasn't just an abstract concept. Cynthia looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without the careful styling she'd always maintained. When they read the charges: conspiracy to commit elder abuse, grand theft of property valued over $3 million, financial fraud, criminal impersonation, her face grew paler with each count. The judge was a woman about my age, someone who'd probably seen every variation of family greed that existed. When Cynthia's public defender requested bail, citing her lack of prior criminal record and community ties, Judge Harrison looked at the evidence summary for a long moment. The defendant systematically stole from a vulnerable adult over a period of 18 months, Judge Harrison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom silence. She wore a $3 million ring to work while telling colleagues it was costume jewelry. She recorded conversations in which she discussed having the victim declared incompetent in order to gain access to additional assets. The court finds that the defendant poses a significant flight risk. Bail denied, the pink diamond sealed her fate. $3 million was federal territory. And federal prosecutors didn't like to lose cases involving elderly victims and stolen family heirlooms. But the legal consequences were only part of the story. By the time I returned home, my actual home, not the house Cynthia had been redecorating, the social fallout was already complete. The story had made the evening news 3 nights running, and social media had turned Cynthia into a cautionary tale about greed and elder abuse. Her sister Rachel called me 2 days after the arraignment, crying. "Grace, I had no idea what she was doing. When she told me you were having memory problems, when she said you'd agreed to move to assisted living, I believed her. I'm so sorry." "She's very convincing," I said, because what else was there to say? Cynthia had fooled a lot of people, including professionals who should have known better. "She's lost her job," Rachel continued. "The marketing firm fired her the day after her arrest. And her book club. Grace, they're all talking. She was supposed to host next week, and now—" Rachel's voice broke. "She was wearing your mother's earrings to book club for months. Everyone saw the news. They all know now." The professional and social destruction was swift and complete. Cynthia's carefully cultivated image as the successful daughter-in-law who was graciously caring for her elderly mother-in-law had been replaced by the reality of a woman who'd stolen a $3 million ring and worn it to Starbucks. But Liam's reaction was what broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. He came to see me 3 weeks after Cynthia's arrest, looking like he'd lost 15 pounds and aged 5 years. I found him sitting on my front porch steps when I returned from grocery shopping, still wearing his work clothes, but somehow diminished in them. "Mom," he said when he saw me approaching, "can we talk?" I invited him into the kitchen where I'd made him countless meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd listened to him practice speeches for high school debate team. But now we sat across from each other like strangers negotiating a treaty. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said without preamble. "Dr. Williams recommended someone who specializes in family dynamics and enablement patterns." I waited. "I enabled her, Mom. For 2 years, I watched her treat you like hired help in your own house, and I convinced myself that you were just adjusting to getting older, that maybe having Cynthia take charge of social planning and household management was actually helpful for you. And now I understand that I was choosing the easy path over the right path. It was easier to let Cynthia make decisions than to have difficult conversations about boundaries. It was easier to laugh along when she made jokes about your age than to defend you. It was easier to believe her version of reality than to admit that my wife was systematically abusing my mother. Liam looked at me with tears in his eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. "Mom, I failed you, as a son, as a lawyer who should have recognized elder abuse when it was happening in front of me, as a human being. I failed you completely." I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he took his first steps, when he'd scraped his knee learning to ride a bicycle, when he'd cried about his first heartbreak in high school. "Yes," I said quietly, "you did fail me." He flinched, but he didn't let go of my hand. "But failing someone isn't the same as being unable to change," I continued. "The question is what you're going to do differently now." That conversation was the beginning of a longer process. Liam moved out of my house that week and into a small apartment downtown. He filed for divorce from Cynthia immediately, something that shocked no one except apparently Cynthia herself, who'd assumed that family loyalty meant he would stand by her regardless of her crimes. She called me collect from jail he told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings, a new tradition we'd established as part of rebuilding trust. She wanted me to post bail and hire her a better lawyer. She said that if I really loved her, I would understand that she was just trying to secure our future. What did you tell her? I told her that love doesn't mean being an accomplice to elder abuse. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once Cynthia was convicted. The federal judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison, a sentence that made the national news because of the value of the stolen ring and the systematic nature of her crimes against an elderly victim. 12 years was longer than I'd expected, but Frank explained that federal sentencing guidelines were harsh when it came to crimes against vulnerable adults, especially when the financial losses were substantial. She'll serve at least 10 years, he told me after the sentencing hearing, and when she gets out, she'll be a convicted felon with a federal record. Her professional life is over. I felt relief, but not satisfaction. There was no joy in watching my son's marriage disintegrate, or seeing a young woman throw away her entire future for jewelry and real estate she could never really have owned. But there was profound relief in knowing that my independence was secure, that my home was mine again, that I would never again have to watch someone plan my life while I stood invisible in my own kitchen. The house felt different with just me in it again, quieter but not lonely, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. I'd had contractors come in to undo most of Cynthia's improvements, restoring Robert's office to its original state, repainting the walls she'd changed, returning furniture to where it belonged. But I kept some of the changes. The kitchen backsplash she'd installed was actually quite beautiful, and the new lighting in the dining room showed off my grandmother's china better than the old fixtures had. I could appreciate good design even when it came from someone who'd been stealing from me. Love doesn't mean being a doormat, but it also doesn't mean being vindictive when vindictiveness serves no purpose. 6 months after Cynthia's sentencing, Liam and I had dinner together in my dining room, the first family meal we'd shared since before his wedding. He'd been in therapy consistently. He'd moved to a new law firm that specialized in elder law advocacy, and he'd started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped elderly adults navigate financial abuse cases. I want to spend the rest of my career making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other people, he told me over dessert. It won't undo what I allowed to happen, but maybe it can mean something. We were learning to be family again, but it was a different kind of family now. One built on honesty instead of convenience, boundaries instead of assumptions, respect instead of habit. It was better, harder but better. 9 months after Cynthia's sentencing, I woke up in my own bedroom, in my own house, to sunlight streaming through windows that no one had rearranged without my permission. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made me grateful to be alive and alert, enough to appreciate it. My coffee routine had changed since reclaiming my independence. Instead of rushing through breakfast while Cynthia planned my day for me, I now took my time. French press coffee, toast with the good jam I'd been saving for special occasions, and 20 minutes with the newspaper at my kitchen table, the table where I now ate every meal in peace. The house had settled back into rhythms that felt like home again. Robert's office was exactly as it had been before Cynthia's improvements. His books restored to their proper shelves, his desk arranged with the careful precision he'd maintained for 40 years. I'd even moved his reading chair back to its spot by the window, where he used to sit with his morning coffee and watch the cardinals at our bird feeder. I'd been spending more time in that office lately, not just for nostalgia, but for practical purposes. The Catherine Morrison Foundation, named for my great-aunt whose ring had exposed Cynthia's crimes, was taking shape, and there was real work to be done. Frank had helped me establish the foundation 6 months earlier. Using a portion of the insurance settlement from my stolen jewelry, the mission was simple: provide emergency financial assistance and legal advocacy for elderly adults facing exploitation by family members. "Grace, you have a unique opportunity here," Frank had said when I first proposed the idea. "Your case got significant media attention, and your experience gives you credibility that most advocates don't have. People will listen to you because you've been where they are." The foundation's first grant recipient was Marie Chen, a 74-year-old widow whose son had been forging her Social Security checks for 3 years. Her case was eerily similar to mine: family exploitation disguised as caregiving concern, financial abuse rationalized as helping mom manage her affairs. I'd met Marie through Detective Chen, who'd started referring cases to the foundation when elderly victims needed resources their families had stripped away. Marie's son had convinced her to sign over power of attorney, then immediately moved her to a cramped apartment while he sold her house and spent her savings on a boat and a vacation home. Unlike me, Marie hadn't documented everything. She hadn't had 40 years of professional experience to fall back on. She'd trusted her son completely, right up until the day she discovered he'd been living in her old house with his girlfriend, while telling neighbors that his mother was too confused to live independently. The foundation paid for Marie's legal representation and temporary housing while she fought to regain control of her assets. 6 months later, she'd recovered most of her property, and her son was facing federal charges. Marie now volunteered with the foundation, helping other elderly victims understand their rights and document abuse. "Grace," she'd told me just last week, "you saved my life. Not just financially, you saved my sense of myself." I was starting to believe I really was too old and confused to manage my own affairs. That was the work now, not just providing money, though that was important, but helping people hold on to their dignity when their own families were systematically stripping it away. The foundation operated out of Robert's office, but it was expanding. We'd already helped 14 families in 8 months, and requests for assistance were coming from 3 neighboring counties. I'd hired Margaret Henderson's daughter, Sarah, as our first full-time coordinator. Sarah was a retired social worker with 30 years of experience in elder advocacy, and she understood both the legal and emotional complexities of family financial abuse. My home became mine again, but it was also becoming something more: a place where healing happened, where justice was planned, where other people's lives were rebuilt. Liam visited every other Sunday now, a schedule we'd established during the early months of rebuilding trust. He would arrive around noon with groceries for both of us, and we'd cook dinner together while he updated me on his work with the Elder Law Clinic and his continued therapy. These visits were different from the obligatory family gatherings we'd endured during his marriage. We actually talked now about his work, about my foundation projects, about memories of his father, about the complicated process of learning to be family again after betrayal and reconstruction. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he'd said during his last visit while we were making Robert's famous Sunday gravy recipe. "I'm seeing someone." I'd stopped stirring and looked at him. "Tell me about her." "Her name is Jennifer. She's a victim's advocate with the district attorney's office. We met through the Elder Abuse Task Force." Liam hesitated. "I know it's probably too soon after everything with Cynthia." "It's been almost a year since your divorce was finalized," I interrupted, "and you're 42 years old. You don't need my permission to date." "I don't need permission, but I want your blessing. After everything that happened, I need to know that you trust my judgment again." I'd thought about that carefully before answering. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt quickly. but it was something that could be rebuilt if both people were willing to do the work. "I trust that you've learned from your mistakes," I'd told him. "I trust that you won't ignore red flags or enable bad behavior because it's easier than having difficult conversations. And I trust that you'll never again allow someone to treat me like hired help in my own house." "Never," he'd said firmly. "I promise you, Mom, never again." The promise felt real because it was backed by action. Liam had spent the past year not just going to therapy, but fundamentally examining how he'd been raised to avoid conflict, how he'd learned to choose harmony over honesty, how his own discomfort with his mother's aging had made him complicit in Cynthia's abuse. He was doing the work, and that made all the difference. My evenings had found their own rhythm, too. After dinner, I would often sit in Robert's chair with a book and a cup of tea, watching the cardinals return to our feeder. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years. Not empty, but spacious. Room to breathe, room to think, room to be myself, without performance or explanation. Sometimes I would call Margaret Whitmore, who'd become a genuine friend during my stay at her house. We'd compare notes on our respective volunteer work. She was still helping women in transition, and I was building resources for elder abuse survivors. Both of us were creating spaces where people could rebuild their lives after family betrayal. "Grace," she'd said to me recently, "you've turned your trauma into a gift for other people. That takes real courage." But it didn't feel like courage. It felt like purpose, like using experience, even painful experience, to create something meaningful. My home became mine again. Not just the legal ownership, which had never really been in question, but the emotional ownership. The right to arrange my furniture as I pleased, to eat dinner at whatever time I chose, to answer my own phone and plan my own social calendar. Simple freedoms that I hadn't realized I'd lost until I'd fought to get them back. It's been 3 years now since federal agents executed that search warrant in my living room, and I'm sitting here in Robert's office, which will always be Robert's office, no matter how many foundation meetings I hold here, looking at our latest quarterly report. The Catherine Morrison Foundation has now helped 67 families recover stolen assets and regain their independence from exploitative relatives. 67 people who thought they were too old, too confused, or too powerless to fight back against their own children and grandchildren and in-laws. We've recovered over $2 million in stolen property, stopped 14 fraudulent guardianship proceedings, and helped establish legal precedents that make elder financial abuse harder to get away with. Not bad for a foundation that started because someone stole what they thought was a piece of costume jewelry. Cynthia has 8 more years left on her federal sentence. I don't think about her often anymore, but when I do, I hope she's learning something useful during her incarceration. Not for my sake. I stopped caring about her redemption arc a long time ago, but for the sake of whatever family relationships she might try to rebuild when she gets out. Liam married Jennifer last spring in a small ceremony in my backyard. She's everything Cynthia wasn't: respectful, genuine, interested in other people's lives rather than just her own advancement. Jennifer asks questions about the foundation's work, remembers details about my volunteer activities, and treats my home like a place she's grateful to be invited into rather than a property she's entitled to claim. They're expecting their first child in December, and I'm going to be a grandmother at 74. The nursery is set up in what used to be Cynthia's meditation space, a poetic justice that's not lost on any of us. But here's what I really want to tell you, because this is the part that matters most. If you're listening to this story while you're folding someone else's laundry in a house that used to feel like yours, if you're sitting in your car after another family gathering where your own children treated you like the hired help, if someone is making plans for your future while you stand there invisible. You're not powerless. I know it feels like you are. I know it seems impossible that someone your age could fight back against people who are younger, more tech-savvy, more comfortable with confrontation. I know you're probably telling yourself that keeping the peace is more important than standing up for yourself, that causing family drama would be worse than accepting disrespect. I thought all those things too. But here's what I learned. Documentation is power. Your memory is more reliable than they want you to believe. Your legal rights don't disappear when you turn 65. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who sees everything. If someone is stealing from you, even if they're calling it borrowing or helping you organize, document it. Take pictures, save receipts, keep records. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong because it probably is wrong. And remember this, respect isn't something you have to earn from your own family. It's something you deserve simply by being human. Age doesn't make you less worthy of dignity. Financial dependence doesn't make exploitation acceptable. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love at all. Sometimes the only way to save your life is to be willing to risk everything you thought you couldn't live without. But what I discovered was that the things I thought I couldn't live without, my son's approval, family harmony, the appearance of being a gracious mother-in-law, those weren't actually keeping me alive. They were killing me slowly, one small compromise at a time. The Catherine Morrison Foundation has a 24-hour helpline now. If you need resources, if you need legal advocacy, if you just need someone to tell you that what's happening to you isn't normal and isn't your fault, we're here. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask for help. My great-aunt Catherine's pink diamond ring is back in my jewelry box, but I wear it now. To charity events, to foundation meetings, to Sunday dinner with Liam and Jennifer. I wear it because it's mine, because I can, because no one gets to decide what has value in my life except me, and because sometimes the most beautiful things are also the strongest. The ring that was supposed to be my downfall became my salvation. The family that was supposed to love me unconditionally taught me that unconditional love starts with loving yourself enough to demand respect. The house I thought I might lose became the headquarters for helping other people keep theirs. Sometimes the quietest person holds all the power. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. And sometimes justice takes longer than you'd like, but it's more thorough than you dared to hope. If you've made it this far in my story, you already know what you need to do. You just need the courage to do it. You're stronger than you think. You're smarter than they're telling you, and you deserve better than what you're accepting. Sometimes the only way forward is through. But on the other side of that fight is a life that's actually yours. Trust me, it's worth it.